Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today we are joined by Chris Davis, Senior Vice President of Milestone Carbon. Chris, we're looking forward to talking with you today, so thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate the invitation to be here.
Of course, yeah. So let's start things off by having you tell us about yourself and Milestone Carbon as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start just by background. I'm trained as an engineer, spent 20 years in the upstream E&P space, primarily with ExxonMobil, and really had an opportunity early on to get involved with carbon capture technology and how to commercialize that, really with a focus on enhanced oil recovery. And this is about 10 years ago when the incentives around CCS looked a lot different. They're not what they are today. And so it was incredibly challenging to find projects that would work. So I had the fortune of being able to work across the value chain in CCS, CCUS, both capture tech, transportation, and then injection and sequestration over that period of time. And then almost 3 years ago now joined Milestone Environmental Services, which is a company that really focuses on managing the waste that is coming from energy and heavy industry. And so the largest part of our business is focused on taking waste from oil field operations in the Permian Basin, the Eagle Ford Basin, and Haynesville, and finding sustainable ways to dispose of that to minimize environmental impact and reduce carbon intensity and avoid emissions going into the atmosphere. When I joined Milestone Environmental Services, the carbon business had not yet been established. And so I came on to set up the plan strategy and build the team out within the existing organization. And since that time, Milestone Carbon has been established as an affiliate to Milestone Environmental Services and is focused exclusively on carbon sequestration, very much in the fashion that the base business operates today. So again, taking waste from emitters and finding sustainable ways to put that waste away.
Very interesting. Now, Milestone is sort of a new breed of company being described as sustainable infrastructure. What do these sustainable infrastructure companies like Milestone uniquely offer?
So with sustainable infrastructure, we leverage a lot of the existing practices, technology that you'll find with midstream infrastructure or other heavy industry petrochemical facilities. But we're really focused on how do we, improve environmental performance, reduce emissions, and reduce carbon intensity for all of these industries. And so we very much are focused on having a better solution for waste and carbon emissions. We're not looking to produce oil and gas, so we don't do any enhanced oil recovery, as an example. It's purely waste management for these industries. And so we bring to the table expertise on how to reduce waste in sustainable ways, in ways that can also be cost effective. And so really what we want to bring to, a lot of the industries that are starting to think about how to address and abate their emissions, low cost solutions for these, what are very expensive challenges for some of our customers. We have validated carbon accounting methodology, so we can assist in how you can think about waste and how much emissions or carbon that you're able to reduce by using our facilities. And we're also, very pragmatic in terms of we want this space to continue to grow, and we think the best way to do that is to help customers find what we'll call advantaged sites and low-cost solutions for abatement. Many of these companies are looking at what are called marginal abatement cost curves right now. And so as they think about their businesses, they're trying to figure out, okay, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where can I spend the lowest amount of dollars to maximize my ability to capture carbon or reduce my environmental impact? And so we want to fit within that as well. And so we try and work with customers to help them understand how our sites can fit into their abatement plans and decarbonization plans. With respect to CCS, sequestration of carbon, for many folks that are new to this space, and I think when you come to it, you can think that there's a lot of places that you can put carbon. There's the rock, are plentiful here, particularly in the United States, North America. There's a lot of oil and gas and drilling operations. And so people, I think sometimes come at the problem thinking, hey, listen, I'm sure we can find a place, on our site or in the battery limits of our facility to put away this carbon. And what we're finding is Yes, there's lots of rocks, but in terms of the cost to sequester carbon, there's a really limited amount of spaces where it's the lowest cost. And so that's what we're focused on. We want to find the lowest cost, most secure and advantage sites for each emitter, each customer that we're working with. And so that's the expertise that we develop in-house. We don't want our clients and customers to have to reinvent the wheel and become geologists and become regulatory experts. We want to be there for them to help with this effort.
That's great. And Milestone Carbon recently announced an agreement for a carbon hub in the Permian Basin. That's very exciting. Could you elaborate on what all this project entails and how carbon hubs impact industrial decarbonization?
Yes. So really the hub concept is not a new one. If you think about how the natural gas industry has developed over decades, really you needed to start with a source in the natural gas world. You started with a source of supply and a customer who's going to take that gas, and then you would lay pipeline infrastructure to get from the source into the demand center. And then over time, we were able to expand infrastructure and extend pipeline networks so that we could reach more and more customers and then also reach more and more sources of supply. And so it'll be a similar process here, I believe, with carbon and CCS. And so what we're looking to do here is identify sites that are close to sources of emissions, multiple sources of emissions. In particular, we're looking for sites that can have access to emissions that can come on as early as possible. As it turns out, high purity emissions are also the lowest cost to capture. And so locating acreage and sites near these high purity sources of emissions is a way to ensure that you can have some early injection of carbon into your site. What's really important about that is, one, you're able to get a project up and running, but two, for sources of emissions that come from facilities like power generation or cement, steel manufacturing, pulp and paper, heavy industry tend to have very low purity emissions, and they're very expensive to capture depending on the nature of the facility. What is happening right now is sources of emissions that we talk to, the emitters that we speak with, they're studying feverishly how best to tackle this problem. And so it's taking them time to figure out how they want to deploy capital and how they want to phase in decarbonization. What we're doing to help with that, there's a conundrum around, well, I want to sequester, I want to capture my emissions, but where do I put it? And those who are developing sites are needing emissions to establish the site so that they can have project up and running. And so what we're looking to do is lean forward in this chicken and egg scenario, set up a site, get it permitted, get high purity emissions flowing into part of the formation, and then reserve some of the formation for growth opportunities, these longer development cycle projects. So again, in these heavier industries with low purity emissions. In the Permian, it's an ideal site for that. So in the Midland Basin, we have just over 10,000 acres that we're developing right now, and you have kind of a mix of high purity emissions that come from gas processing. So natural gas processing facilities are extracting CO2 that naturally comes out of the ground with the gas. They have to take out that CO2 so that it can meet a certain specification so that it can be sold, and we can use it, at the burner tip in our homes and in power plants and other facilities. And so that CO2 today is just being extracted and sent straight into the atmosphere. It's not just one or two facilities. There's dozens of facilities that are extracting CO2 and would be really good candidates for sequestration. So we're locating a site that is near these types of facilities. But in addition, in the Permian, you still have heavy industry as well. Natural gas power generation is one example. There's also cement manufacturing. And these are the types of industries that are going to take a little bit longer to plan and execute a decarbonization strategy. So by setting up a hub in the Midland Basin, we're also setting up a hub in the Delaware Basin, which is in Loving County on the west side. We're planting our flag and letting all of the emitters know in these areas and in these regions that, hey, we're here, we're ready for you, we want to work with you in terms of how to sequence and plan capture and sequestration for your particular facilities. The third point I'll raise is that in addition to the sites and facilities that exist already, there are a number of new facilities that are being planned. And these are low carbon facilities of all industries, of all varieties. And again, they're looking for sites that have proven, established sequestration capabilities. So once you get the hubs going, you're able to help the existing industries in an area, but you're also able to attract new facilities and new developments into these locations. Again, we think the U.S. Gulf Coast is really well positioned. The Permian Basin is well positioned. And then there are other areas in the U.S. that we think are going to also be well positioned to address all three: the high purity emissions, the low purity existing emissions, and these new greenfield low carbon facilities.
And Chris, how do economic development and landowner benefits connect with these carbon hubs?
Yeah, so first I'll say community involvement and support is essential for any of these projects. And so landowners are an important constituent in the stakeholder groups that we work with. But I will also say local communities, leadership, even, the fire department. So there's just all sorts of constituents that need to be engaged and involved. And so that's another, part of these projects that we're also bringing to the table. We engage with the community to help them be educated and understand what we're doing. Specific to the landowners, we speak with landowners, and in the U.S., it's a different situation than in other countries. So states like Texas, where a surface owner likely has pore space rights attached to their surface ownership, they have the ability and opportunity to participate in these projects directly. And so we engage with landowners and we offer financial benefits in a couple of different ways. So typically there's an evaluation period that we go through, and landowners will receive payments, and effectively they're not going to really see a whole lot going on. So we do a lot of pre-permitting activities. We'll go out, look at the land and stake out some things. We may need to shoot seismic surveys to have a better understanding of the rocks and the geology. But for this part of the activity, it's pretty minimal involvement of the landowner. But it's a great opportunity for them to monetize some of their acreage. If we're able to move into permitting and then eventually operations, then there's additional financial benefits that come to landowners during this time. And what's really, I think, interesting about the carbon sequestration world is it's not just the owners of the surface site where a well is being drilled or where the pipeline is being laid. Those landowners that have pore space, or think just the holes in the rocks that sit underneath their surface acreage, they too have an opportunity to benefit financially from these projects. And so we look to secure acreage that can accommodate the injection of CO2 for many, many years. In fact, we're looking at 10 to 20 years for our projects as we think about how much land we need to aggregate. And so we're actively out working with landowners to, one, find out if they're interested in supporting and being a part of these projects, and then trying to find out what's the right financial arrangement that works for them. And many times it's them and their families. What's, I think, also unique about this as opposed to the oil industry is that we are actually looking for the opposite of what we would have looked for in the oil and gas world. So in my prior life, I would be looking for formations that actually contain hydrocarbons, that contain accumulations of oil or gas. Now I'm actually looking for the complete opposite. I'm looking for parts of the rocks that just contain very high salinity, salty brine water that really have no other use. So these are formations that are very deep, they're far below any drinking water sources and have no other use for humans. And so that's where traditionally, as a culture, we've stored waste products deep in the earth in these brine formations. And so those are the types of locations we're looking for. And in the past, those who had ownership of acreage that had these brine formations really didn't receive any kind of financial benefit for it. There was no demand, there was no need for it. And so there's a bit of a renaissance in a way with some of the landowners now that were perhaps passed over for big financial windfalls in the oil and gas space. They're now starting to see some financial benefits come from something that wasn't needed or in demand even a few years ago.
So you stressed the importance of community at the beginning of your last answer. I wanted to ask, how important is Class 6 primacy in these individual projects, but also just at a sector level in the overall acceleration of the carbon capture and storage industry?
So Class 6 primacy, and for those who may be new to it, so the idea of primacy is really around how the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level has delegated down to the states the ability to permit certain types of injection wells. So UIC is underground injection control. These are rules and regulations around how we inject fluids into the earth, which we've been doing, again, for many decades, have lots of expertise in this. And, we've used it to dispose of things like toxic water that's produced. We can take hazardous gases and hazardous chemicals, and these can be injected, and it's all done according to EPA regulations around injection control. And the prime objectives are to protect drinking water sources in the ground. And so as we think about engineering and designing wells and facilities, it is protecting drinking water sources for local communities that is of the utmost priority. So there's a lot of thinking and engineering and design that goes into all of these programs. Class 6 is a specific category of permit that is reserved for carbon sequestration wells. It's a high standard design protocol, and there's a lot of rules and regulations that govern that. Why primacy is so important is that it allows the state, so local regulators who are very familiar with the communities, they're familiar with the geology, they understand the location. This allows the local experts to facilitate and advance the permits in these regions. And so the EPA is being inundated right now. They have, well over 100 applications for these Class 6 wells for carbon sequestration. We know they are working feverishly to advance these through technical review. They need more resources. And one way to do that is to use regulators that are already in place within the states who already permit other injection wells to lend a hand and help advance this process. So we look for Class 6 primacy as a way to help accelerate carbon sequestration across the United States. There are 2 states right now that currently have primacy. So this is Wyoming and North Dakota. And for one example, in North Dakota, they've been able to issue a Class 6 permit in less than a year. And, whereas now with the EPA, we're still trying to get our head around how many months and years it's going to take. But they tell us to plan for 2 or more years to get a permit currently with the way things are structured. So our hope is that by being primacy go to the states, we can get that time frame down to 2+ years, something down to 6 to 12 months. So with Class 6 primacy, the states that are nearing, hopefully going to be receiving it soon, hopefully in 2024, we think Louisiana is quite close. They have some more work that they're working through on the public comment period. We're thinking that Texas won't be far behind. There are other states who are also moving towards a primacy application to the EPA. So it may seem a little bit kind of wonky, but it's actually quite an important development to unlock more projects in our industry.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, we are coming near the end of our time here. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close out?
Just a reminder that while we talk about CCS, and it's gotten a lot of attention recently, carbon management has been happening for decades. So I just always want to remind communities and folks who are coming to this perhaps new or recently that we've been capturing carbon. We've been transporting carbon in pipelines. We've been injecting carbon dioxide into the subsurface for a very, very long time. And it is a exceptionally safe practice, and we have a great operating track record. I always remind everyone that no industry is immune to safety incidents, and we are always striving to have 0 incidents. But I am actually quite pleased that we can talk about the carbon management industry as one that has had no fatalities. There was a recent congressional report that talked about how few incidents have actually occurred and been registered. In fact, before 2020, I'm only aware of 1 recorded reportable incident. 2020, there was an incident that affected a small community. And this is really important that we focus on any incidents that occur so that we can improve our operating and safety culture and practices. But I want folks to understand that we have 5,000 miles plus of CO2 pipelines. We've been injecting these fluids, again, for many decades, particularly here in Texas and in the Permian Basin, lots of experience with CO2 pipelines and injection. And my hope, too, is that the carbon hubs, particularly in the Gulf Coast and in the Permian Basin, will continue to extend on these safety track records so that we can show the rest of the country that, hey, this can be done. We can scale this up. This is actually going to be a really important economic opportunity for the United States. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more states jump in and encourage investment here.
Well said. Again, we are speaking with Chris Davis of Milestone Carbon. Thank you again for joining me today, Chris. It was great to talk with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. This was fun.
Of course, and thank you to our listeners. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please reach out. And for more podcasts like this one, visit carboncapturemagazine.com and subscribe for more industry news. We hope that you enjoyed this podcast and look forward to next time. Until then.